Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Toronto Global Forum. My name is Brian Tobin. I do occasionally spend time at the Bank of Montreal, but for purposes of this conference, I'm the chairman of the advisory board and delighted to be here with all of the team and all of the crew. I have the pleasure of grilling the guy who's my boss. If you think I'm going too far, holler, because I want my job when this week is over. Darryl, welcome to the Toronto Global Forum.
Thank you.
Before we begin to talk about the large economic issues that all of us are familiar with this week, I thought it would be useful if we spent a little time talking about a little bit about the Bank of Montreal. In a few days, it'll be, much to my surprise, and perhaps to yours as well, it'll be 8 years since you've taken on the role of Chief Executive Officer at the bank. What's changed for BMO during that period of time?
Yeah, so a lot, in short. But first, let me just congratulate you, Brian, and your chairmanship of the Advisory Council here. This is a really important forum. We're very happy to be a part of it for a long period of time. And when Brian says he spends a little bit of time at the Bank of Montreal, he spends a hell of a lot of time at Bank of Montreal. So it's not like he had nothing else to do when he took this on. So congratulations, and thank you for doing it. Look, as I look back, we have, over the course of the period of time that you referenced, we've roughly doubled the size of the bank. We had about $700 billion of assets. We've got $1.4 trillion of assets today. The market cap of the bank is about $130 billion. I think importantly, the geographic mix has shifted a little bit. We've reallocated capital away from some businesses and geographies. We're about 40% allocated to the United States right now, and that's an important thing in the world, as we might talk about in a moment. We're about 50%, super convenient round numbers, in Canada, and then 5 to 10% internationally in China and in Europe and the UK. So the mix has changed, the size has grown, and we continue to be ambitious in terms of how we want to grow the bank, roughly with that geographic proportioning that I just described to you. I think it's a distinct advantage that we bring. We participate in North America in all 4 lines of business that you know well: consumer banking, commercial banking, wealth management, capital markets. Capital markets businesses are very active internationally, as you know, in Europe and in China in particular, and we've got some wealth management and investments in China. So in the main, a lot has changed in terms of the complexion of the bank. The performance of the bank has been very good. We've got a lot of excess capital, and we're trying to figure out right now how do we allocate that capital against the best returns. But if you sort of draw a thread through everything in the course of, let's say, the last decade in our industry, it's probably not much different from many industries. The 2 factors that I think drive decision making and outcomes for our clients, because at the end of the day we go as our clients go, are the scaling of the digital first agenda across everything we do, including machine learning from decades ago all the way to the advanced work that we do front office, back office, end to end on artificial intelligence today, and then of course the geopolitic. And so the geopolitic changes feels sometimes like by the minute, and sometimes by the hour, the week, or the month, and so we're always attuned to that. So when you have tech change and geo change driving agenda change every day, but you have to make certain choices in terms of how you want to service the client and stick with those, and those are the enduring franchises that we commit to.
So interesting, as you point out, there are a lot of changes occurring, and some of those changes are phenomenal. I mean, we saw a commentary coming from the President of the United States in response to actions by China on rare earths last week, and that commentary resulted in $2 trillion being wiped from the markets on Friday in the U.S. markets. Some of that recovered over yesterday. But one of the decisions you made, so we have to respond in the short term, but you got to respond and think about the long term as well, was you've made, on behalf of the Bank of Montreal, the largest single investment by a Canadian bank in buying a U.S.-based bank asset in Bank of the West. Can you talk to that decision? It was a large call for the Bank of Montreal.
Yeah, it was, and it's going quite well, by the way. But the backdrop to that is, when you think of the tectonic plates shifting in the world, do you or don't you believe in what I call Advantage North America? And I believe in Advantage North America profoundly. I think the world is reorganizing. It doesn't mean we're not going to have bets and businesses in other parts of the world. But when we look at the North American continent and we look at the combination of attributes that it brings together, and I know it feels all stressed and elbows up and everything else right now, but the combination of attributes that it brings together with everything that we can do in Canada, including a lot of the industries that are here, and I would say the pension funds, banks are as good as anybody in the world, as well as the deepest consumer market on the planet, that's not going to change. A lot of things might change with trade agreements, but that's not going to change. So our decision to keep pushing into that side of things. So the bank we bought is in California. It was a great complement to the 4 decades of work we've been doing in the Midwest of the United States and the capital markets we've been doing in the East Coast. And it's a very clear signaling that we think that there's a North American advantage at play here relative to the rest of the world. There'll be other places in the world that succeed as well, but I really wouldn't bet against us in the next 10 or 20 years, even though I think those next 10 or 20 years are going to be pretty different from the last 10 or 20.
The conference we're attending today, of course, is an international conference in scope. It attracts delegates and leaders, practitioners of business from all around the world, and that's a wonderful thing. And of course, this is the 19th conference here in Toronto today. But a week ago, you were hosting or co-hosting a conference that was focused on Canada and the United States. And at that conference, we had participants like Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Commerce. We had the Prime Minister of Canada participate in that conference with some commentary, and many other senior players in the Canadian economy. That was right in the middle of the back and forth between Canada and the U.S. In fact, the Prime Minister Carney, who was in Washington meeting with Mr. Trump during the course of that meeting. What takeaways did you take from that meeting, and what observations can you share with us?
Yeah, it's interesting because the backdrop to this gathering that we curated, as we look back, it was 3 or 4 years ago, right? So we weren't this prescient sometimes, but when we're looking at the North American continent, we realized that there are lots of places where political actors can convene one-on-one in a bilateral way, or even with groups of them. There are asset allocators who can do the same thing, and there are CEOs and business leaders who can do the same thing, but there was no place, literally, we scoured everywhere. There was no place where we could put them all together to talk about one topic, which is this thing called the U.S.-Canada relationship, and we put them under one roof to do that. We did that 3 years ago under the auspices of let's have some foresight that the USMCA agreement, the CUSMA agreement, is going to be renewed in 3 years, and let's have this conversation. Well, then, here we are, and everything else that's happened in between. And last week was a culmination of a lot of those conversations around national security, energy security, and really trade dominated, right? Which is not a surprise to anybody. When I think about my takeaways, Brian, I think that this audience probably won't be surprised by this, but others might be. Anybody who kind of goes into this with the expectation that this is just a lot of drama and everything's going to settle down exactly the way it was for the last 10 years, I think that's a very bad assumption. Like, that's not going to be the case. There is going to be change. How profound that change is, we don't know yet. And I think the planning that folks do and the stress testing that you ought to do against your scenario planning should assume that there'll be a different outcome, and that'll include some form of tariffs. I think the strategy that the government is employing to negotiate over here on the sectoral tariffs separately from preserving as much as we can on the USMCA is a smart one. In the meantime, we have basically the best deal in the world with the Americans, despite the flare that we see every day in the media. And so I think the objective is sound in terms of the strategy that's being played there. So that was a pretty prominent theme as we go through the conversations we had last week. And then the other one was, which we are trying to push. You can hear me push this a lot. In a reorganizing world, our American friends are pretty clear that it might be America first, but it's not necessarily America alone. And, Canadians don't like to hear it, but if you were Canada second in an America first world, and then there's a whole bunch of people behind you, and you get to China at some point in the conversation, this notion of advantage North America starts to become real. So I think there's a lot of, despite the headlines, despite the drama, I think there is a lot of well-intended and probably well-executed work going on to take advantage of those inherent advantages where we can help each other as two countries. And I don't say that trivializing the discomfort that a lot of people have. Like there's a lot of discomfort in this, whether it's patriotic, whether it's emotional, or whether it's somebody who's worried about losing their job because they're in the affected sectors. I mean, that's real stuff that we all have to take very seriously. But in the main, I came away, Brian, a lot more positive by the end of the sessions than I did at the beginning.
Well, let me just pick up on that, because I think what you've said is important to examine a little further. I spent 22 years of my life in elected politics in Canada. For those of you who aren't Canadian, I spent time as quite a young age, 25, in the House of Commons as an MP and as a cabinet minister, the Minister of Industry, and for a number of years as the premier of one of our provinces, Newfoundland and Labrador, as well. And at the end of the day, you know, one of the important things to never forget when you are a political practitioner, it's been a long time for me now, is that politics is the art of the possible. And so we've got in a moment now in Canada where we, in the perfect world, are asking our Prime Minister and government to deliver the status quo, to go back to where we were. You've just told us, I think you've just told us, that's probably not realistic. I think if we understand the pressures on the U.S. government to fix a budget deficit and a debt-to-GDP ratio that's way too high, in excess of 100%, the addiction to tariffs is not going away anytime soon. So let me try and draw this out. Is the observation, let's try and get a best deal, a reasonable deal, a non-lethal deal on tariffs, as opposed to trying to negotiate something we can't achieve, which is status quo?
Yeah, but no, I think the objective is twofold. I think it's to get the best deal for Canadians, and I keep saying it, for North America, that we could possibly get out of both the sectoral negotiations that are ongoing as we speak and the USMCA renewal, which we're probably not going to really see an outcome until sometime next year, maybe late next year. So in the meantime, like, we kind of need to relax. All 75, 85% of everything's going across the border. Zero, right? Like, so it's okay that gets kicked down the road, and that's good for our exporting economy and our importing economy, by the way. And at the same time, we have to take advantage of the moment here in Canada. Like, we've been talking about this, and you know, like the everything from, you know, this is the wake-up call, right? Like, everything from interprovincial trade barriers, which I've said publicly we think can add 60, maybe it's $100 billion of GDP. That would overwhelm almost any negative impact I could think of from the USMCA renewal by itself. That's before we get at the other issues in Canada where we've been uncompetitive. And we've been uncompetitive for way too long on tax, on regulation, and on tone in this country. And so if we can grab this moment, and I'm worried because there was a lot of conversation about this 2, 3, 5, 6 months ago, and this was our moment. We were going to take advantage of this. We were going to get our act together. We were going to trim the hedges. And I'm worried that the air goes out of this balloon.
Yeah.
Interprovincial trade barriers, national projects, build pipelines, assess and attack tax reform so that it's competitive to attract international capital. There's a lot of international investors here, and they come to see me and they say, you know what, Darryl, I'm sitting up kind of on the edge of my seat a little more than I was before on Canada, and it's kind of the analogy I use. It's like kind of getting out of the parking lot into the stadium to the edge of the seats. But we're fooling ourselves, Brian, if we think those people are going to get on the field. They're not going to get on the field until they see the term sheet. Yeah. And that term sheet has a competitive term sheet. It might be in Europe, but it's more likely to be in the United States. And if all things were equal, for example, and I could do a capital project in the United States and I could depreciate it in 1 year under the tax policies in the BBB, but in Canada I can't, then it's an easy decision, and I can be all elbows up and patriotic and all the rest of it, but at the end of the day, capital's not that sophisticated. It'll flow to the point of least resistance. So I think we have a moment here in Canada that if we can take advantage of the threat that is going to compromise our economy a little bit and do things that will advantage our economy a lot more than that while we negotiate the best deal we possibly can, then we have a win-win. And we have, you know, less than a year, I think, to achieve that. And, you know, it's high stakes. It's very high stakes, but I think we can do it.
So let's talk about the moment, because it's an interesting moment. There was a lot of, I think, analysis that the tariff impact that would hit us quickly, fairly dramatically, it'd be measured right away, and which is not to say there aren't impacts. We've heard the Stellantis news yesterday and again this morning, moving a plant that would otherwise have been in Canada, Jeep plant, into the U.S. But when we look at the numbers, the Canadian job numbers outperformed that which was expected. When we look at the reporting in the last 24, 48 hours, for example, in the U.S. of the large U.S. banks, they're all beating, by and large, analyst expectations, doing reasonably well, notwithstanding the fact that, quote unquote, we're in the midst of a trade war with big players like China, the United States. What's happening out there in the real economy that the banks can beat expectations? The job numbers are stronger than expected. What's going on?
I would be careful. I would be careful with the headlines driven by averages. Headlines driven by averages. So, in this country, the unemployment rate is 7.1%. I could survey 25 economists on the four corners of Bay and King. I might get a range around it, but I'm of the view that we're going closer to 8% before we come back below 7%. And it's because it's going to take a while for the adjustment period that we're going through, that we have to go through. And that's a pretty high rate of unemployment in this country. When you talk about the banks posting big results, we have to be careful when we look at those results. What's happening is that the Wall Street businesses, as I call them, so the capital markets businesses, investment banking, wealth management, trading businesses are doing very well. There's very conducive markets there, and the banks are producing good results. Look beneath the surface at Main Street, move from Wall Street to Main Street, and it's not so pretty. Right? So you start to see, and there's very slow loan growth, which is a signal that demand is slowing down. They're starting to see some cracks in the credit quality. You heard a couple of the U.S. banks talk about the credit quality of their credit card book. So that's unsecured consumer credit, which is usually the first to go when somebody's worried about paying the bill on Friday. And so what we're seeing happen here is be careful of headlines driven by averages, because nobody's average. We're seeing the dispersion around averages go a lot wider in both countries. And that's whether you're an individual, a family, a household, a small business, or a large business. And what's the old saying? The average is like, it's like having your feet in the freezer and your head in the oven. Like, on average, you feel fine, but it's pretty goddamn uncomfortable. I think we're getting more and more and more uncomfortable. And that includes society risk with respect to income inequality that is very real. So I think there are a lot of people out there in the bottom quintile and maybe the last two quintiles who are having a tough time, because if you have assets, you have real estate, you're in the market, you hold fixed income assets, you're probably doing a little bit better every single day. Life is great. But the U.S. economy is fascinating, right? 50% of spending in the U.S. economy is driven by 10% of the population. All right, if you're in the 10%, you're driving some great outcomes. But if you're in the 90%, this is a tougher ride than the headlines would suggest.
So let me circle back to your earlier commentary. I wanted to draw that answer out of you, because it's easy to make the mistaken assumption that we're just fine, thank you very much. Look at the bank numbers, look at the employment numbers, et cetera. Everything is relatively fine. You've told us, be careful, don't jump to conclusions. So let me go back to your earlier commentary about what the government of Canada can or should be looking at doing. And if I don't want to put words in your mouth, because that's a dangerous thing to do.
It's okay. Why would you stop now?
Yeah, you're right. The problem with him, he's way too observant. What would you say to the government of Canada? I thought I heard a call for acting in a manner quite, I don't want to use the word radical, but almost radical for governments of Canada, to leapfrog into a different competitive position for Canada, to make things happen even faster than has been talked about, to use the tax system to incent or reward actions. Now I put some words in your mouth. Would you care to add to what I've said?
So those are good words in my mouth and in yours. I think that, when Elvis said that we needed a little less conversation, a little more action, we need a little more action, man. We've had governments campaign, including provincial governments, including in your home province, a progressive conservative government, on the theme that this is a crisis and we're not going to let the crisis go to waste. So are we letting the crisis go to waste? Like, are we competitive on tone? Are we competitive on tax? I know the answer to that is absolutely not, and that's not being talked about enough. The trade file is dominating the conversation. It's omnipresent, and there are things that we can do that can overwhelm the trade file with tax incentives. We did adjust capital gains, but we have to adjust the accelerated depreciation. Corporate tax rates need to be competitive. Personal tax rates need to be competitive. We have a little bit of fiscal capacity to play with here, and this is from a balanced budget guy. So this is the moment where throw that out the window and take a little bit more risk, I would say, is a competitive advantage we do have, and unleash that capacity of Canadians, not just to get the energy and the rare earths out of the ground, but to actually have projects where we can have advanced manufacturing on top of that, and then diversify the trade relationships a little bit. But honestly, like, that's an interesting thing to say, we're going to diversify because the relationship with the Americans has changed, which I think it is. It's fundamentally changed. But look, geography is geography. It may not be destiny, but it's pretty damn close, right? Like, if we were to do everything we could with every business in this room to diversify our trade relationships from the Americans over 5 or 10 years, we might move at 5 or 10%, right? Realistically. So we got to take action in our own house, and we've got to do it fast.
So the bottom line is the Canada-U.S. relationship is going to be the dominant relationship forever, and somehow we're going to make it work in a better way.
That's not a bad thing.
Than may otherwise be the case.
That's not a bad thing. You're in Canada. Let's face it. You wake up on third base. You're attached to the greatest consumer economy in the world, and you will be forever. What are you going to do about that? Okay,
so you've given us some leverage, some leave to spend a little. I'm talking about the government of Canada. In your view, worry about the deficit battle a little later down the road, but not too far down the road. Give us your view on interest rate policy in the context of everything we've just talked about.
So look, I mentioned earlier the unemployment rate in Canada may be holding steady around 7.1%. I think it could get a little bit worse before it gets better. There is a transmission effect that takes time when we see interest rate policy move. Canada's, I think, done a good job and moved faster than most advanced economies on the rate, and probably should move a little further. We probably should see more rate cuts. I can't, I don't set the rate, but I think we probably should, and I think it's a minor piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Like, I think it will inspire a little bit more activity on spending, but somebody who's kind of been on the edge of the cliff and is at the point where they're sort of falling over and hanging on by their fingernails, you give them 25 basis points on their mortgage, that's not going to be the difference maker, right? But I do think it will have to be part of the package, and it probably will be. In the U.S., almost certainly we will see rate cuts and more rate cuts in the United States than we will in Canada, and part of that is political. The politicization of the Fed is a real thing. Like, let's not pretend it's not. It's real, and it's happening.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Let me throw China on the table between us. Bank of Montreal has a fully licensed bank in China. We've been there for a long time. We're present in multiple locations. We, in particular, have been strong over the years in the resource industry, the mining industry, et cetera. China. Is it realistic at all for anybody to suggest that somehow you can trade away from China, put up Fortress North America, and ignore the reality of the presence of China in the global economy? Well,
I guess I'd say two things, and managing this conflict is the tricky part for I think all of us as we think about capital allocation. I do think that the settling point of this trade tariff discussion, as the United States basically is attempting to reorganize the world order, the very order that it created post-World War II, is real and likely to be 80% anchored in how does the U.S.-China relationship itself settle. Like, that is the main event, right? So if you think that, keep the main thing, that's the main thing. In the meantime, I don't think it's as simple as, well, do I attach myself here or here? Am I with you or am I with, you know what I mean? Like, we have natural advantages here in North America. with the Americans for obvious reasons, but at the same time, does that mean everything you just talked about in terms of our positioning, our investment, our option value in China, we're going to turn our back on that? No, we're not going to. So I think we all have to figure out what our proportionality is. And I may say that in the main for regular way business, there's lots to do here with the Americans, but there's going to be, in the long, long, long run, an amazing value creation play in China. And I think you use the word turning our backs. I'd be careful not to do that, particularly if you have good partners in China.
There you go. Darryl White, thank you very much. And I hope I'm still eligible for my bonus by the end of the year. We'll see.
You're in.
Thank you.